Is everybody in? Is everybody in? Is everybody in? The ceremony is about to begin.
We can invent kingdoms of our own, grand purple thrones, those chairs of lust and love we must, in beds of rust. Steel doors lock in prisoners' screams, and Muzak AM rocks their dreams. No black men's pride to hoist the beams, while mocking angels sift what seems to be a collage of magazine dust, scratched on foreheads of walls of trust. This is just jail for those who must get up in the morning and fight for such unusable standards, while weeping maidens show off penury and pout ravings for a mad staff.
Ha ha! Welcome to yet another very special edition of Inside Wayne Manor with Stephen Wayne and Friends. I am Stephen Wayne. Thank you very much for subscribing to this podcast, and thank you very much if you're just checking it out. I hope all of you are healthy and safe, and it looks like, well, we're going to be getting back to normal. As I said, this is a very special edition, and it all revolves around James Douglas Morrison. Love him or hate him, he is an iconic rock star, a legend, both dead and alive. Shaman, Dionysus, but most importantly, a poet. I personally have been fascinated with Jim Morrison since I first read No One Here Gets Out Alive by Jerry Hopkins and Danny Sugarman when it was first published back in 1980. And by the way, I was in high school. I loved The Doors. And believe me, I knew it wasn't everybody's cup of tea, but I respected the band not only for their dark music, but Jim's dark lyrics as well. And on July 3rd in 1971 in Paris, France, Jim Morrison died, if that's what you believe. And after all these years, I am still intrigued by Mr. Mojo Rising. So to honor the 50th anniversary of his so-called death, I give to you a very special Inside Wayne Manor with Stephen Wayne and Friends, Jim Gone for 50, Part 1. It is Jim Morrison by Jim Morrison, a collection of audio from previous interviews throughout his career. But we start this podcast with the people that knew him best. Biographer and manager Danny Sugarman, guitarist Robbie Krieger, drummer John Densmore, and the late, great Ray Manzarek. These particular audio pieces were taken from the brilliant broadcast by legendary LA DJ and friend of the Doors, Jim Ladd, from his special audio autobiography, which was called No One Here Gets Out Alive, which, by the way, is available on Rhino Records.
About mid-July, probably around the 4th of July weekend, I wouldn't be surprised. We're out on the beach, and who comes walking down the beach but Jim Morrison? I said, "Hey, man, what are you doing here? And you back?" And he said, "No, I never left. I stayed down in Venice, getting stoned and taking acid and writing songs." I said, "Oh yeah, far out, man, writing songs." Because I never realized Jim could write songs. I just knew he was a good guy and did write poetry and like that, I suppose. But all of a sudden he became a songwriter. And I said, "Well, let me hear one of the songs." And he sang Moonlight Drive. He just sang the song out. "Let's swim to the moon, let's climb through the tide," just sing the melody. "Penetrate the evening that the city sleeps to hide. Let's swim out tonight, love, it's our turn to die. Park beside the ocean on our moonlight drive." And I said, whoa, wait a minute, man. Can I hear what I could do to that? Just put it into a minor, dark, moody, funky, organy, spacey kind of thing. So that's how we were born. That's where the Doors came from.
We just really knew each other musically, and we knew Jim too, It's funny, the three of us used to talk about how we could make Jim move around, sort of. We knew sort of how to rile him up. I mean, he'd be so stoned or whatever, but there were little things we could do where we could just make him go into some dance or something, Because he was so open, just take me, He lived in the subconscious, it seems like, so he'd just jump off the stage or do anything, you know. But there was a connection there, and we could kind of steer him around at times. And then, of course, other times he'd completely do whatever he wanted.
Well, I think one thing that I could say was that Morrison was the only, if not one of the few, performers that I knew that really believed it, what he was saying, you know. He lived that life, you know. He wasn't just up there doing his trip and then he'd go home and then watch TV and have a beer and laugh at it all, you know, and laugh all the way to the bank. He was a guy that he lived that life that he lived out on stage all the time. And when he went home, it was to some cheap motel somewhere, and he just hung out until the next show, you know. Sometimes, like, he would be the most great guy you've ever want to meet, you know, just be super polite and together and clean and everything else, you know. But then the next day he'd be completely the other way. But, you know, all those stories are true, most of them. And, like, you know, his whole life was right on the edge, you know. And that's why, and people could sense that when he was on stage, that, you know, there was always something under there ready to happen. And, you know, if they were lucky that night, it might happen, you know. All I can say is that he was totally committed to living the life of the revolution.
The Doors were the house band at the Whiskey. I think they were opening for Love or Van Morrison. And Jim was staying at the Tropicana, and Ray and John go down to get him. Ray doesn't show up for the first set, and Ray sings. And they go down to the Tropicana, and they're knocking on Jim's door. Come on, Jim, we know you're in there. Open up, man. Door cracks open, and you see this one eye, man, just blazing with life and vision. And Jim opens the door, and he's standing there naked, and he's just got hands full of acid tabs. Jim Morrison had an incredible ability to hold drugs, and they took him up to the Whiskey. And finally they get to their last song, and Jim's going into the end, and he starts improvising. And it was really the first Doors improvisation. Anybody that saw the Doors knew that Jim would launch to incredible cascades of poetry. Just incredible, man. What a genius.
And now the Lizard King speaks about Jim Morrison. He describes himself, the Doors' music, and the band's longevity, and most importantly, his image. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. James Douglas Morrison.
Shut up! Now, is that any way to behave at a rock and roll concert? You don't want to hear that for the next half hour, do you? All right, shh. Come on. Damn, give the singer some, man. All right.
Name? Jim. Occupation?
Me and my mother and father, I'm not sure if a sister was there, whether she was alive or not, and a grandmother and a grandfather were driving through the desert at dawn, and a truckload of Indian workers had either hit another car or just, I don't know what happened. There were Indians scattered all over the highway, bleeding to death. So the car pulls up and stops. And I'm just a kid, so I have to stay in the car with the women, I don't know whether I'm crazy or what, but the reaction I get now, thinking about it, looking back, is that possibly the soul of one of those Indians, or maybe several of them, just ran over and just jumped into my fucking brain, and they're still in there.
Although there's no separation between personal life and this life. It's all the same life. Well, just like, does a student have a personal life? So when he's having a social life, he's not a student anymore. It's, well, like, when a policeman's off duty, he's still a policeman.
Well, you know, it's like being married or being a member of a family. You know, there's always strife. You know, people that live together fight a lot. I've noticed that we went through a period of kind of, it was really getting strained, and in the last few months, everything is really smoothed out. I think when you're creating well, when the music is going well, everybody's happy. It's only when your creativity kind of dies off a little bit, then everybody starts feeling the strain, you know. The relations are very good these days.
Sensuous, evil, a mood of mystery and strangeness, and also a little bit of religion thrown in there too.
Jim Morrison, singer.
The Doors.
L.A., San Francisco, all up and down the coast. West Coast. The West is the best.
The Doors. The Unconscious.
The gap is getting wider day by day. Strange days. Rebellion, chaos, disorder, and activity that appears to have no meaning. A central theme or a motif, a thread running through the songs we don't have, but we definitely do have an atmosphere or a mood which might be characterized as an awareness of the strange, that something's wrong, something's not quite right. The old are getting older and the young are getting somewhere.
And we may have been one of the first groups to come along that were openly self-conscious about being performers. In other words, reflecting on our own career as it was happening. It's not that we were trend conscious, we were doing exactly what we would have done anyway, but it came at the right time when you could get away with expressing sentiments like that. More than writing music and as a singer, any of that, I think my greatest talent was I had an instinctive knack for self-image propagation.
I think we're the band you love to hate. So it's been that way from the beginning. You know, we're universally despised. I kind of relish the whole situation. I think of myself as an intelligent, sensitive human being with the soul of a clown, which always forces me to blow it at the most important moments.
Jim Morrison was truly an agent of chaos. Several arrests, including one in New Haven and Las Vegas, but his most infamous was in Miami. He was born in the state of Florida, and he returned not to greet his fellow Floridians, but to make a mistake and a mishap that changed how we view musical censorship and the freedom of free speech. The Miami incident.
Hey, listen, I'm lonely. I need some love, you all. Come on. Ain't nobody gonna love my ass. Come on. Hey, there's a bunch of people way back there that I didn't even notice. Hey, how about 50 or 60 of you people come up here and love my ass? Come on.
I think I was just fed up with the image that had been created around me, in which I had sometimes consciously, most of the time unconsciously cooperated with. It got too much for me to really stomach, and so I just kind of put an end to it in one glorious evening.
You're all a bunch of fucking idiots! Letting people tell you what you're gonna do! Letting people push you around! How long do you think it's gonna last? How long are you gonna let it go on? How long are you gonna let them push you around? How long? Maybe you like it. Maybe you like being pushed around. Maybe you love it. Maybe you love getting your face stuck in the shit. Come on. You're all a bunch of slaves. Bunch of slaves. You're all a a bunch of slaves, letting everybody push you around. What are you gonna do about it? What are you gonna do about it?
President of the Greater Miami Crime Commission, I'm calling upon the Dade County Grand Jury and the State Attorney's Office to immediately take criminal action against those that were responsible for the deplorable condition and situation that occurred at the Dade County Auditorium this past weekend, when the group known as the Doors, the rock and roll group, attempted to precipitate a riot.
We have taken out 2 warrants for Jim Morrison. One of them is for indecent exposure. The other is for the use of obscene languages during his performance at Dinner Key Saturday night.
I think that nudity it's really a cyclical phenomenon. I think it comes, it gets very liberal and extreme, then it goes back, reacts the other way, and that just seems to be a cycle in entertainment.
In other words, you feel that the same liberalism performed in the theater, acting, should be also generated in music.
Well, in the realm of art and theater, I do think that there should be complete freedom for the artist and performer. I'm not personally that convinced that nudity is always, a necessary part of, a play or film, but the artist should feel free to use it if he feels like it.
This court is expected to be crowded with local teeny bopper fans, just happy to be in the same room with Morrison. Defense lawyers predict a 6-week trial, but whether the long-haired court watchers will sit by that long for a chance to light the rock singer's fire is something else again.
Jim, you're facing 3.5 years in state prison for the Miami incident. The scope of this trial goes way beyond rock and roll. It's really about the First Amendment.
What we're testing down there is the issue of artistic freedom of expression, and it's a significant issue, and the trial is very interesting.
You seem confident.
Right. And hopefully it'll be over in time for me to do a European tour.
I had a trial of about 6 weeks. It was very interesting, and the felony rap was dismissed, and I'm still stuck with 2 misdemeanors, which could add up to about 8 months in jail. I maintain that I'm admitting the charge of public profanity, but I'm denying the exposure charge, and so we're going to appeal that for as long as it takes to get it dismissed. It may take another year or 2.
Up until that point, rock and roll had never been put on trial like that before. Jim Morrison was acquitted on all but 2 misdemeanor charges and sentenced to 6 months hard labor and fined $500. He was appealing that conviction, but it was never heard because he passed away in 1971. Although pardoned in 2010, the outgoing Florida governor, Charlie Crist, said this: "The pardon isn't going to settle the boundaries of artistic freedom or alter the Morrison myth in the annals of rock history. Nor is it likely to settle the ongoing debate about whether Morrison ever actually did pull his zipper down at the concert that night. But it does send a message about forgiveness. Too little, too late," recalls the surviving Doors members and the Morrison family. We are going to wrap up this very special edition of Inside Wayne Manor with Stephen Wayne and Friends, Jim Gone for 50, Part 1 of our 2-part series. Many thanks to all the fine interviewers that sat down with Mr. Jim Morrison and shared their audio with the world, including Mike Lazar, Jeffrey Cannon, Howard Smith, Bob Karush, and Sally Stevenson. And of course, I would like to thank the Doors themselves: John Densmore, Mr. Robbie Krieger, and of course the late, great Ray Manzarek, and Mr. James Douglas Morrison. Coming up in part 2 of Jim Gone for 50, Inside Wayne Manor with Stephen Wayne and Friends, we will explore more about Mr. Morrison, also his predictions of the future of culture and music, his death, and I'll share with you an interview I did that was never broadcast until now, with the author who made us believe in Jim Morrison all over again. As always, I would like to thank you very, very much for subscribing to this podcast. And if you're a fan of Jim Morrison like I am and a fan of the Doors, thank you very much for checking it out.
Is everybody in? Is everybody in? Is everybody in? The ceremony is about to begin. Hi, how you doing, man? Yeah. Looking good. Everything is fucked up as usual, you know. When I was back there in seminary school, there was a person there who put forth the proposition that you can petition the Lord with prayer. Petition the Lord with prayer. You cannot petition the Lord with prayer.
Come on and get your Woo! Welcome to another edition of Inside Wayne Manor with Stephen Wayne and Friends. Yes, it is another special edition. This is the second part of my tribute to James Douglas Morrison, the rock star, the shaman, the Dionysus, but most importantly, the poet. This is called Jim Gone for 50, Part 2. So as always, I would like to thank you very much for subscribing to this podcast, and thank you very much for checking it out, and hopefully you enjoyed Part 1. And I'm telling you, man, I've had a really good time putting this one together as we honor the 50th year, so-called, air quotes, passing of Mr. James Douglas Morrison. For as long as I can remember, man, I have loved music. And since first listening to the Doors' debut album, I loved the Doors. My two favorite is the first one, self-entitled, and the last one, L.A. Woman. L.A. Woman is my anthem record, especially now that I live here in Los Angeles, California. And then in the late 70s, not knowing much about the enigmatic lead singer being dead, I put them aside until 1980. That's when I got my copy of No One Here Gets Out Alive by Mr. Jerry Hopkins. I must have read that thing a dozen times through high school. I became obsessed, and that obsession carried through high school and even when I worked in radio. During my radio career, I began to travel to California to cover musicians, shows, and I found Venice Beach. And that obsession began all over again. Venice Beach and listening to those two Doors albums. But it had taken on a new meaning. I began to research the Lizard King even more, spending time in his home county and now my second home. That leads me to this. I had a chance back in 2009 to interview the author of the book that started it all for me, Mr. Jerry Hopkins, co-author of the biography of Jim Morrison. I have never aired any of this audio until now. Working at a hard rock station my entire career, it just didn't seem relevant. But on this, the 50th anniversary of Jim Morrison's so-called death, here is some of my conversation with Jerry about Jim. What made Jim Morrison tick?
Jim was one of the few rock and roll stars of that period, maybe of any period, that truly walked to a different drummer. There were an awful lot of rock and rollers back in the 60s who subscribed to the hippie ethic. But as soon as they got any money, they bought big cars and big houses and big drug habits. And Jim continued to live in a motel room and and drank fairly cheap whiskey. He denied his parents were alive, which is that's the epitome or personification of the generation gap. But beyond that, Jim really felt that what you should do is test the boundaries, to go out to whatever you perceive to be the edge and then go a little bit further if you can, to experience life more fully, even if there was risk involved.
But when you spoke with him and you spoke with him face to face, what did you think? Did you think that he was tortured, or did you think he was brilliant? What did you really think was going on inside his head?
I didn't think Jim was a particularly tortured individual, and the word brilliant is tossed around. Genius, that's tossed around too frequently, too. Jim was an extremely intelligent guy who read voluminously, seemed to remember everything he read, and put things together in an interesting fashion, intellectually. He wanted to be accepted as a poet, and I think that he regarded rock and roll as a platform from which he could project his poetry. And I think he succeeded.
And then you wrote The Lizard King afterwards. What prompted you to make a second go at it at Jim Morrison?
The Lizard King, which was published by a London firm, was that editor's idea. She wanted me to do a more personal take on Jim Morrison, and I felt that a good way to augment whatever it is I left out of the first book, or what I personally felt about him, was to include a lot of the question and answers interviews that Morrison had done during his life, because I felt he was not only intelligent but extremely articulate, and I wanted Morrison to speak for himself. So the second go-round was mainly to present Morrison in his own words.
That was Mr. Jerry Hopkins, and the co-author of No One Here Gets Out Alive. He penned that book with Danny Sugarman, and he is also the sole author of The Lizard King. I also honor Mr. Hopkins because he passed away in 2018. So I was lucky enough to get a chance to chat with him. But I will tell you this, in 2012, I was delivered with the news that I was going to sit down with the one and only Mr. Ray Manzarek. I got the date, I jumped on a plane, and I flew to Venice Beach. As soon as I settled in, I was contacted by the representative for Mr. Manzarek, and he said Ray was not feeling well, and he definitely wanted to reschedule. Ah, the one that got away, because soon after, in 2013, Mr. Ray Manzarek passed away. And now, back to James on Jim. Mr. Morrison was kind of like a prophet. In his own words, we're going to hear him predict not only the future heroes, cultural statements, but he solidly predicted the future of music and EDM.
I think the new heroes will probably be political activists. In the 20s, it was sports figures, 30s and 40s, it was movie stars and World War II aces and all that kind of thing. And then the music figures became the heroes. I think the next heroes will probably be a more intellectual sort, political activists and perhaps scientists and computer experts, people like that. People that have an understanding, an intellectual awareness, and a knowledge of how things run, how modern society runs, and they'll probably be the new heroes. I think each generation supersedes the last one in intelligence and awareness, and I think there's been a giant step recently. The young people that I've seen in my travels around, while they're very young and naive in a lot of ways, I think they have an incredible intelligence and awareness. I like to be pessimistic, but I think they're far better equipped to handle what's coming. Look at it this way, too. The hippie lifestyle is really a middle-class phenomenon, and it could not exist in any other society except ours, where there's such an incredible surfeit of goods, products, and leisure time. I think that's the reason for it, because the generations immediately preceding ours had world wars and depressions to contend with. For the last 10 or 15 years in this country, there's time enough, there's money enough to live a kind of a flagrant, outrageous lifestyle, which was impossible before. But each generation wants new symbols, new people, and new names for what they want to divorce themselves from the preceding generation. So they won't call it rock. They'll invent some new name for it. It's kind of naive, because I think the future is going to become increasingly mechanized, computerized, as you call it. I don't think there's any turning back. It's just figuring out a way to survive and thrive in that kind of society. I don't think there's any chance of going back.
I was talking about that this weekend, thinking a lot about it. I think the two basic types of music indigenous to this country are the black music, blues, and the kind of folk music that was brought over from Europe. And
I guess they call it country music, or the kind of West Virginia high and lonesome sound. Those are the two main streams of root American music. There might be others, I don't know. But it looks like 10 years ago, what they called rock and roll was kind of a blending of those two forms. And I guess what's happening now is that rock is kind of dying out. Everyone is going back to the roots again. Some are going back into country, and some are going back into basic blues. I guess in 4 or 5 years, the new generation's music will be, it'll have a synthesis of those two elements and some third thing that'll be entire. Maybe it'll be, it might rely heavily on electronics, tapes. I can kind of envision maybe one person with a lot of machines, tapes, and electronic setups, singing or speaking and using machines.
Not bad, huh? Also, Mr. Mojo Rison and I had something in common. Our love for beer.
I drink a lot of beer.
You still do?
When I'm recording, especially. If you drink hard liquor when you're recording, pretty soon you're so out of it, you can't do anything anymore. But beer, it gives you a little energy, and you can keep going all night, you know. And beer is really puts on the pounds.
July 3rd. The date, the reason for this special podcast, 1971. 50 years have passed. And whether you believe it or not, July 3rd, 1971 is when Mr. James Douglas Morrison supposedly left this plane. Or, like me, you might think otherwise. This day remains a reminder of the great musician, writer, the poet, and the legend. And for those who knew him personally, they all have their side of the story for July 3rd, 1971. In this montage, you will hear Ben Fong Torres, Michael McClure, and the Doors manager, Bill Siddons. But first, how did this soothsayer see his own death?
I hope at about age 120, with a sense of humor and a nice, comfortable bed with... No, I wouldn't want anybody around. I just want to quietly drift off. I think science has a chance in our lifetime to conquer death. I think it's very possible.
Jim Morrison, the lead singer for The Doors, a rock music group, is dead. He was 27. His personal manager said he died in Paris, probably of heart failure.
Spokesman for the public relations firm representing The Doors rock musical group says the group's lead singer, James Morrison, had died in Paris. Efforts to confirm the report in Paris were not immediately successful. The spokesman, Bob Gibson, of the public relations firm in Los Angeles, could give no explanation of the delay in announcing the death. Gibson says he learned of Morrison's death of apparently natural causes from William Siddons, the singer's personal manager. Unofficially, I can tell you Mr. Morrison is dead. Jim Morrison is dead, and they say natural causes.
This is Jim Ladd of KLOS. We interrupt this broadcast to bring you a special bulletin. Rock music fans all over the world are in mourning today. Jim Morrison, lead singer of The Doors, was found dead in his Paris apartment this morning. French authorities attribute the cause of death to a heart attack. Morrison was 27 years old. Goodbye, Jim. We'll miss you.
We knew from the gravity of the reports from Paris and hearing from Bill Siddons, the manager who had gone there to help to arrange the burial, that this is all too real.
Jim went in to take a hot bath, and she describes finding him the next morning. She'd gone to sleep, and he had died in the bathtub on his back. She said he was smiling. I'm glad to hear that.
Phone rang Monday morning at 4:30, and my wife Sherry sat bolt upright when the phone started ringing and said, "Jim's dead." And I looked at her and went, "What?" And I answered the phone, and it was Clive Selwood, our label manager in the UK, telling me that 3 different journalists had called him and told him that Jim had died. And I got a 3:30 plane and was in Paris at 6:30 the next morning. I just held her for a minute and The coffin was in the living room. I literally spent hours with Pamela just talking. And she said he told me when he was there, when he died, he wanted to be buried in Père Lachaise. I just thought it was beautiful that he even knew enough that that's where he might want to be buried, and I thought it was, there was something completely right about doing this. And I was absolutely clear, having been through a number of press debacles in my life, that the best thing we could do is not tell anybody. We're going to do it our way. We're going to bury a poet. How about that? Mr. Siddons maintains to this day that he felt no need or desire to look into the casket to make sure that Jim's body was in there. So there you have it, man. We wrap up Jim Gone for 50. Inside Wayne Manor with Stephen Wayne and friends. And I want to thank you very much for subscribing. And I want to thank you very much, even if you're just checking this out, because like me, you love the Doors and are fascinated with Mr. Jim Morrison. I hope that all of you are healthy and safe, because that is what it is all about. I also want to thank you for allowing me to do this. I'm going to tell you that I've waited a very long time to put all of this together, and I am excited that I got a chance to share it all with you. I also want to thank all of the interviewers that gave us the great audio and have shared it for the world to hear, like Mr. Ben Fong Torres, Tony Thomas, PBS, and Martin Smith. I will also post a collection of source material to give credit where credit is due, as well as suggested reading, listening, and watching. It goes without saying I have to thank Mr. John Densmore and Mr. Robbie Krieger as well, but I leave you with the thoughts of Jim by the late Ray Manzarek, and also Mr. Morrison reciting one of my favorite works of his, Graveyard Poem. Before Ray, before Jim, here's Studio Guy to give you the haps on where you can find everything inside Wayne Manor with Stephen Wayne and Friends.
Everything inside Wayne Manor with Stephen Wayne and Friends can be found at www.insidewaynemanor.com. Episodes, playlists, contact, social media, and more, all inside waynemanor.com.
Rest in peace, Mr. James Douglas Morrison, and maybe I shall finally meet you someday. Until we do this again, peace!
His world on you depends. Our life will never end. The ultimate statement, our life will never end. And the ancient Egyptians used to say that if you say a man's name, he is alive. So I take this opportunity to say Jim Morrison.
It was the greatest night of my life, although I still had not found a wife. I had my friends right there beside me. We were close together. We scaled the wall, we tripped through the graveyard. Ancient shapes were all around us. No music, but the wet grass felt fresh beside the fog. Two made love in a silent spot. One chased a rabbit into the dark. A girl got drunk and bawled the dead, and I gave empty sermons to my head. Cemetery cool and quiet, hate to leave your sacred lay, dread the milky coming of the day. I'd love to stay, 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 I'd love to stay.
Your call has been forwarded to an automatic voice message system. Is not available. At the tone, please record your message. When you have finished recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options.
Hey, thank you very much for the meeting with me. I really appreciate it. And thank you for the info. 432-77150.